So, good afternoon, Peter. It's an absolute delight to meet you in your hometown of Istanbul. So it's March the 6th, and as we're both in Istanbul.
Yeah.
So, when did you first come to live in Turkey?
Oh gosh, 30 years ago.
30 years ago.
On business, yeah, I loved it. I seem to have overstayed.
Yeah, and so one of the things we've talked about before is your interest in paganism, because of course you one of the first books I reviewed was about Mystai, of course, and the Villa de Mysteri. My question is, how did you get involved in paganism? What attracted you?
I think I would have to point to a period of like 1970, when I encountered The White Goddess by Robert Graves. I think it was just republished by Faber in '71. And reading that combined, I don't know, it had such an aesthetic about it. Okay, it's literary, but it was so resonant in what it had to say, you know. And living so close to North Wales, which I knew very well, I felt a huge resonance with what Robert Graves was saying about the old faith. And so during the 70s, as a teenager, I used to hitchhike around the country, and I would sleep rough in the fields, and so I'm visiting from Walsham to Glastonbury, to Stonehenge, to Avebury. So I actually spent the night at these sites, sleeping on I had a small sleeping bag and a camera.
As we did in those days.
Yeah,
you could
just
actually
did
do
that.
Yeah.
I would just sleep under under a hedge, and then next day get going again.
Yeah.
So I kind of had this immersion in these ancient sites, the culture that Robert Graves was opening up at that time. And that led me to the Mabinogion and all the old Celtic myths and legends. And it kind of just grew out of that. I had such a visceral feeling for it. I wouldn't call it an intellectual one. It wasn't. It was more connected and rooted in certain sites and in the land itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's how it really got going for me. So, but that was years before I started writing seriously, you know, which is only in the last 25 years I've been writing as like professional.
Yeah. And what have you found out about paganism in Turkey? Because there's a rich tradition here, but what's attracted you in Turkey?
Yeah, for me, the Greco-Roman inheritance, the whole Hellenistic world, pretty well for me hinged on Constantinople and the Aegean coast. And for me, this Alexandria, Constantinople and Athens are like the 3 points of a huge triangle with an overlapping culture. But in Asia Minor, it's at its richest because it was the wealthiest part of the empire. So the riches here are untold.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like each year we find another city, you know, and places like Ephesus, which have been excavated for 100 years or whatever, still only are like 15% of the original city is uncovered at this time. It's untold riches, and the depth of it. I mean, you can walk around the walls of Troy, for instance, you know, which takes you right back to the Bronze Age. So you have like a cultural matrix here, which is inexhaustible in its treasures, in its riches. And it's that passion I have for that visceral connectedness to that culture which holds me here.
But of course, your interest in the sacred sites, as we saw in the book Mystai, you've gone beyond the sort of tourist attraction of, because you've also started looking at the symbolism, and you were just saying that in Mystai we were talking about the role of the elderly woman And how did you discover that it was an elderly woman, not a newborn young lady?
Yeah, so many things came together to make that possible. One is the fact that I've been interested in the mystery since I was in my teens. So I kind of assimilated so much around the ritual processes. But a couple of years before I started writing the book, they had cleaned the surface of the frescoes for the first time using a laser.
Oh my goodness.
And it took a microscopic layer off and allowed the original colours and detail to be seen for the first time since the site was excavated in 1912, whenever. So I was fortunate in being able to discern levels of detail which hadn't been evident before. Secondly, a number of women scholars had successively studied the dress codes and especially the hairstyles of both Greek and Roman priestesses. And that was really the key that for me opened up the ritual process, because I could then discern the Greco-Roman elements within it and their significance. So I'm kind of just resting on that scholarship.
Well, it was, why do you think it was important that it was an elderly woman in that particular initiation process?
I think what it indicates is that she was a initiatrix. That's to say, she carried a living lineage of Dionysian initiation. She had been hired and brought to this elite Roman villa specifically to execute the initiation of Dionysus for the Romans, the elite Roman family who lived there. So she'd come along, I believe, with a daughter or a close relative and a son, because we know from classical sources that they always, in the performance of Dionysian mysteries in this kind of itinerant format, there would always be a very small boy who would be supervised. He read the liturgy.
Oh, right.
So it would typically be a small family group who would come along. They're hired for this occasion, and she would convey the lineage. She would have to have several generations of inherited lineage in conveying the mysteries. So we're looking actually at a very powerful figure.
Yes.
And her accompanying family who helped her to do it.
Well, it's interesting looking at my own Wicca tradition, the role of the woman, and it's, for some people it's a matrilineal tradition. I see it slightly differently, but I do recognise the role. And one of the things that, going straight back to my own experiences of Turkey, of Anatolia actually, and the visit to Lagina, the sanctuary of Hecate, was the role of the woman. But as you say, the elderly woman who would then be the centre. When we were just talking about the bee culture and how much of the Wicca vocabulary is centred around, you know, the queen bee and even the word hive, or which in Turkish I understood is the same word as kovan. So the link with the Wicca tradition, and I'm wondering how much Gerald Gardner really also picked up. Excuse me. I don't think he was that he came to Anatolia.
No.
We know that he was obviously in Europe, obviously, but his main centre was actually Malaysia and the whole Indonesian, and he was also interested in ritual objects. For example,
I was going to say iconography is an enormous conveyor of traditions over thousands of years.
Yes.
So, you know, if you look at the Minoan, the Mediterranean civilization, you see the bee as a central symbolism very early on, from like Bronze Age or something. And you know, the fact that it's part of the culture of cultivation of honey makes it a natural metaphor, I think, because the organization of the bees is kind of an idealization of how a society or culture or even a tribal group should operate.
Well, indeed, I mean, Rudolf Steiner also, he also wrote about the whole bee culture, and he was warning people in the 1920s. I think it was a lecture in Dornach, when he was actually lecturing for the local beekeepers and saying, warning about the dangers of monoculture, and that bees had a specific role, and definitely the queen bee would have a specific role, and the connection with bees and the solar cycle was very interesting.
We may add one other layer on that. There's a phenomenon called mad honey.
Okay,
and this is a honey cultivated in specific parts of Anatolia, which has strong entheogenic properties. So again, when we look at the mystery cults, and especially the ancient Bronze Age cultures, the issue of the entheogens comes into them. And we saw this in the Villa of the Mystai. If you look at all the legs of the chairs, and they're all like mushroom shaped at the bottom, but you'll never find a single piece of Roman furniture that actually has that. So it's clearly a symbolic. So that in that case, it's Amanita muscaria. Okay, but mad honey is another alternative. It's a real thing.
Well, it was also on the way from Bodrum to Lagina, because of many separate beehives, what have you. And of course, they were advertising local honey as an aphrodisiac, aphrodisias. So it was buy the local honey, and you've automatically got the aphrodisiac. So this connection with also the trance-like properties that would be enhanced by whether it was honey or whether it was plants, as you say. I think it was often hidden in these, also in the practice of the dances, but also again the rituals.
Of course, these cultures also had an intense focus on all kinds of mixtures of herbs and everything, because it was part of the healing to know the different types of condition that those herbs would facilitate, or help. So from entheogenic to, even if someone is passing away, in pain reduction, or even for common ailments, you need to know your herbs and spices and how to mix them.
This is definitely part of the Wicca tradition, and why many people are interested in herbs. And of course, it was saying, the herbs themselves, you have to know which are the poisons. Because if you're going to administer tinctures or whatever, and flying ointment and what have you, have to know what kind of dosage, otherwise you end up, on the other side. So yes, the whole.
Tell you where I noticed the honey cultivation was on the hills leading up to Labranda. A huge number of honey hives were up there on the slopes.
That doesn't surprise me. I recognise it going up towards Lagina, and that's when I kind of noticed it, because it was just spotted and sort of by the honey here, but the emphasis on aphrodisiac.
Those slopes are also very much a pine kind of, aren't they? So it's also kind of Dionysian territory as well, very strongly.
And of course, Labranda was dedicated to Zeus. And one of the things I found out when I was actually at Lagina was part of one of the freezers, which actually on the ground, one of the guys actually pointed out that the labyrinth, which has become a very favourite for some of mine, he said that it was pointing towards Labranda. So again, there was this connection with Zeus and Hecate, and we know that Zeus and Hecate had a very close connection, because Zeus asked Hecate to help Demeter to find Persephone. So there was Zeus proclaiming Hecate to be queen.
I think that that is writ large in Hesiod's theogony, where they kind of say, well, there's the ancient gods and then there's the Olympians, but Hecate is like an ancient god, but she's acknowledged by the Olympians.
But she's not allowed to go through the gates, and so she's definitely a class of the Titans. It is interesting. She doesn't become an Olympian god or goddess, and so that is kind of. So why were the Olympian? Why was she feared? I always wonder why she wasn't included, because she definitely had these powers. but even then she kind of becomes excluded.
Yeah, I think
so it's very much like we have.
She's so primordial.
Yeah, well, exactly.
That's my feeling.
I think she was also feared, and a lot of these tides could also not be tamed.
Yeah.
You know, so they have this wild nature.
And that's definitely my experience.
Yes, and I think this is why Hexy becomes demonized later.
Yeah.
And of course, in recent times, many of the witches have claimed Hecate as their goddess. And I think
she can't be civilized.
Well, indeed. But on the other hand, it becomes, unfortunately, I think Hecate has become popularized not for her universality. I think Sarita Deste has also written much about, of course.
Yeah.
When she saw I'd been to Nagina, of course, that's when she said, "Oh, I must find out more about the sanctuary," and that's when she created the covenant of Hecate, and that's become huge, absolutely huge. So it's interesting to see how various ancient energies, or how we want to describe it, are now emerging, especially from the point of view of being popular with women.
Yeah.
Women seeking these archetypes, if you like, as role models.
They're so empowering. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
Which brings me to something about the book, which here is the book. I think it's a beautiful, I mean, it's a very simple cover, but I wrote the review in Wicked Raid for, I think, was it Morg? I can't remember where it was. No, it wasn't it, Morg. Yes, it was. I'm getting my timelines wrong here. I apologise for having to cut it very short.
Yeah, you were travelling, weren't you?
Yes, I was travelling as usual. But one of the things I wanted to point out for everybody was actually, I think this version, standard hardback, is absolutely superior to what I discovered as being the Amazon paperback.
Print on demand.
Print on demand.
Yeah.
So that was why I wanted to get it out. And again, you can see here the quality of it is absolutely stupendous. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, I mean, we could talk about the book for hours, but one thing I noticed was this one where you refer to. You were talking about, it's called Drawing Down the Moon, and so of course in Wicca we have the ritual of drawing down the moon every moon. When I read this, it's a totally different, different ritual. So could you explain? You were just talking about this illustration. So could you tell us a little bit more about this from the point of view of the tarot?
Okay. This is, I mean, this ritual is attested from something like 700 BC, at least.
Wow.
That's the earliest reference I've found to it.
Okay.
It was it's also attested to in Greek literature. That's to say, Aristophanes talks about it, and so it probably has numerous variations in how it's conducted.
Yes.
In the context of the Solar Busker, what this set of ritual cards embodies is a Hellenistic, Byzantine recension of the ritual. Okay, and in this context, it's designed to take a set of planetary and astral energies, bring them through the waning moon. They're malefic energies rather than beatific, through the waning moon into a menstruum.
Right.
Now the menstruum is held inside the container, which is actually a spinning top.
Yeah, can you just point that out, because it's really interesting.
Let me hold it up for...
Yeah. Because this is really fascinating, because the drawing down the moon we do in the craft is actually with full moon, and you've already mentioned that this is a ritual for waning moon, which automatically gives a completely different... So I think so explain a bit more.
The reason that it's a waning moon is that in the Chaldean oracles, it recommends this for works of manifestation. Okay, it doesn't have, so to speak, a moral spin on it.
Right.
Okay. it's simply the most efficacious way in which to bring through those energies into this menstruum, which I say the spinning top that they're using is one of the toys of Dionysus. Okay, so as you know from the myth, or he had a collection of toys he's playing with, and then he's murdered by the Titans. So this is one of them. All the toys had a magical property, so to speak, and a currency within Hellenistic magic. So this is interesting for me because this is a 15th century Renaissance artifact.
Yes, yeah.
And yet it's manifesting pure Hellenistic ritual practices that are not otherwise documented.
Right.
It's absolutely amazing. So it's this that gave me the clue to begin looking towards Constantinople as a possible source for the information. And of course I found it when I realized George Gemistus was not only a pagan and practicing Hellenist, but he'd also developed a whole set of rituals for pagan use. Well, in this case, they've chosen a waning moon because the Chaldean oracles indicates that is optimal for acts or works of manifestation.
Right.
Okay, but I mean, none of these traditions are invariant. As you say, the tradition you're working with uses a full moon.
Yes, yes.
But I would guess that the kinds of workings you're doing are probably more closely associated with that.
Well, definitely, because we have the drawing down the moon ritual is actually at full moon, and our idea is to draw down the moon. In other words, draw down the power of the goddess. Normally, people would associate the moon with the goddess, of course, and Doreen Valiente, of course, wrote or is attributed to writing the charge of the goddess, and that was also if you didn't have any other liturgy or whatever, you could actually use the charge to draw down the goddess into the priestess.
So we have inspired speech.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and then it just start listening to the words of the goddess. Sometimes people don't need the charge to evoke this conversation, but the point is that the drawing down the moon is a way of the priestess to be able to deliver words of wisdom or whatever. Yeah. So this is why I think it's fascinating that the source of the drawing down the moon seems to be also Hellenic, but it's a very different approach than what you're describing. So this is why I'm so fascinated by it.
The 700 BC reference was from Persia. So it's like multiple cultures, and it'd be interesting to check if there's an Egyptian equivalent. That would be fascinating.
There's not that much information about drawing down the moon as a ritual.
Like generic ritual.
It's always been you draw down the moon, you have a pool of water, and then you converse with the goddess. But it's interesting here that you're using the waning moon. I mean, why not? Why not? And this is why I think it's so important that if you find evidence. But you were just talking about the actual illustration. You were saying about the dolphin and the snake.
Yeah,
that was also fascinating.
There's like a polarity in the imagery. That's to say, the operator the ritualist is wearing a dolphin-themed hat, and yet the staff that they're carrying has a kind of dragon shape, and throughout the Solar Busker there's a play on the polarity of dolphin and dragon, which is also curious, and I'd like to try and understand the root of that.
Yes,
because there's many references to the cult of Baal Hamon within this deck of cards as well, and so we know that Tanit, the Carthaginian goddess, is associated with dolphins.
Yes,
and her consort, Baal Hamon, is associated with the dragon force.
Right. Yeah.
So it's almost like again, when I say Carthaginian, we can locate it to Carthage, but it's actually a much earlier Near Eastern polarity of a sea goddess who is associated with dolphins and the deity who's kind of the dragon force.
Yes.
And I believe that this particular drawing down the moon ritual is preparatory to a sacrifice
Brilliant,
that will take
yes.
place later on in order to invoke the draconian force itself into the operator.
Fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating. Which is another reason for buying the book.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's highly recommended, and if nothing else, bringing up these specific, as you pointed out, the difference between the what was the other? I'm getting brain foggy. The other tarot.
So the Tarot de Marseille.
Yes, the Solar Busk is just fascinating because of the, as you said, the grotesque,
Yeah.
and for many people quite disturbing. The imagery is
Yeah,
quite disturbing.
it's a pure ritual
Yes.
deck of cards, actually.
Yes, but as I said, my eye just fell on this specifically.
That's a fascinating
Yes.
thing to discuss.
Yeah,
that was-
absolutely. So thank you for your time, and as I say, for everybody to really consider buying this book. And as I say, I recommend from Scarlet Imprint.
Lovely to see you in
yes.
Istanbul, Morgana.
So
It's
anyway,
a delight
thank
to
you very
talk.
much for your
My
time.
pleasure.
Thank you.